Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you've been well. This video is going to be kind of a tangent video. I don't do clickbait or anything, so I'm sure you know from the title what we're talking about. And we're talking about moving to the mountains. There's kind of an ongoing joke on my channel where I try to work it into every video where I say, I live in the mountains of Colorado. Now, it's not a joke. I do live in the mountains of Colorado, but it kind of stemmed from people always asking me constantly, where do you live? Where do you live? Where do you live? And now viewers of my channel obviously know where I live, but you know, maybe it's the scenery. I decided to film this on my back deck, but people want to know because I think it's beautiful, and I'm guessing that's why people ask, because they want to know, because they might want to move there themselves. So that kind of has sparked inquiries, probably hundreds of inquiries to date, where people have asked me like where they should move, how, you know, what to consider when moving to the mountains, like as much as sending me listings, asking me if this is a good spot. Now I can't get to most of those, and I'm not a realtor either, so I can't really advise on that kind of stuff. But I said, you know, I do live in the mountains. I love living in the mountains. I encourage people to live in the mountains, so I'll just make a video about it so I can kind of point people here. So I'll try to kind of section this video up for people that don't know, that aren't used to my videos. I talk a lot, but I do put chapters down below here, so you can just kind of click it or whatever, and then it'll expand and you can skip ahead to what you care about. So I actually kind of jotted down some notes in this video, the good, the bad, and then some things to consider. So those are kind of the three main points in the video. And I'll start with just like a little bit of background. So I didn't grow up in the mountains. You know, I don't have a father and grandfather and great-great-grandfather. We were all mountain men. No, I actually only moved to the mountains about 8 years ago. And I'm not, you know, I'm not the traditional, you know, I have a big beard. I don't look like a lumberjack. So I'm just a regular dude that said, you know what, I want to move to the mountains. But yeah, I have lived in the mountains for about 8 years. Most of those were at about 9,000 feet of elevation in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. I have friends that live in the mountains, family that live in the mountains. I've lived in the mountains, so I have a pretty good grasp of you know, ability to give some advice and some feedback on it, but not an expert. And then a little more backstory even than that. Probably my older brother is an inspiration for a lot of things in my life in general. One of those was he's always been more of an outdoorsman than me, but he always wanted to live in the mountains, and he moved to the mountains before me. He used to live in the suburbs, and I used to live in the suburbs, and then he moved to the mountains. And then I would visit him. I'd go up, you know, on the weekends to go shooting or whatever, and I would stop in his house and be like, man, this is nice. I want to do this. I want this life. So I kind of made a plan, and a couple years later, I myself bought a house in the mountains, and I moved to the mountains of Colorado. My parents also, I think after my brother, bought a little place in the mountains, and so they lived in the mountains for a little, so I'd visit them in the mountains as well. They eventually moved back to kind of the suburbs for some kind of health reasons, high altitude. I'll get to that kind of later in the video. But anyway, my brother, my parents, and myself, we've all had kind of different experiences living in the mountains as well. So yeah, that's kind of my history with the mountains, and I absolutely love living in the mountains. But it does come with some trade-offs. So before we get into the good, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, AG1. Now, they sponsored a handful of videos on the channel. Hugely appreciative of their support over this last year. And it's been kind of funny. I don't need to talk so long in the sponsored portions, but I really am appreciative because this sponsorship has kind of turned into me focusing more on my health in general. This is kind of outside of the sponsorship, but that healthy step has kind of made me reevaluate a lot of my life choices. So my whole family is now eating healthier in general, and I believe a part of that is thanks to AG1. But anyway, if you don't know AG1, AG1 is helping empower people to take ownership of their health. It is foundational nutrition. It kind of checks all of the main boxes of nutrition. The things that I kind of care most about is brain health, and that kind of goes with healthy aging, immunity support, and gut health. If you have been into the health journey recently, there's kind of trending like how important gut health is and how important kind of getting everything you need for your brain and the development of your brain and the aging of your brain is. So AG1 is one little powder that kind of checks all those boxes. So as it's getting cold, it's actually cold here. The sun is just about set and it's in the 30s, so my hands will get a little bit cold here. It does, in the cold seasons, kind of an extra little step to help with your immunity. But it's so simple, I'll do it on camera here. You get about 8 ounces of water, put a scoop of the green stuff right in here. You give it a little shake. Now it isn't packed with sugars or anything like that, so it's a very earthy drink, but not too bad at all. So if you've been wanting to try it out, actually it's a great time because for you guys, they are including a free canister, which I really like putting this in the fridge. It's a little easier. Shaker, a year's supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free travel packs. And you just go to drinkag1.com/LLOD and you can find all the info there. So yeah, thanks again to AG1 for sponsoring today's video. So I said I was gonna get into the good, but right before I was just thinking of this one thing. I know not everybody can move to the mountains, so don't take this as like a if you don't move to the mountains, you suck kind of deal. A lot of people have certain life scenarios, circumstances, family, job obligations. There's a lot of reasons that people can't just up and leave and move to the mountains. And I get that, it is what it is, it's not for everyone, but some people can, and others can eventually. So make a plan. Where I'm living now, like I shopped for land while I was living in the mountains. I already found land and eventually designed and built the house. That's all on this channel, the house I'm living in. So it was a long plan for me that it's kind of come into fruition. So if that's you, maybe one day you can make it happen and then you can refer back to this video. So the good, I could talk all day about the good. I love living in the mountains. I love it. Whenever you want to go for a vacation, probably where do you go? You get a little mountain, or the beach. Some people go to the beach, but you get a little mountain retreat getaway, or, it's just, it's beautiful. So probably the first point is just like beauty and peace. I don't hear people honking horns. I don't hear anything other than this bird that just flew onto the deck, and actually my downspout's dripping a little bit, but it's just beautiful and it's peaceful. So every day you just look out your window and you're like, man, this is the life. And there are there are hundreds, thousands probably of studies about the benefits of kind of bringing nature into your life. Now, some people, you live in the city, you work in the city, the best you can do is get some indoor plants or get a different wallpaper on your background. But even that stuff is supposed to help, but immensely helpful when you're actually just immersed in it. And along with that, obviously, comes fresher air. There's less pollution. There are less cars. There's not an industrial complex that's churning out dog food up here. So it's just nice and clean. Another benefit is you're closer to things that you probably want to do. Now, things that you probably want, skiing, hiking, camping, mountain biking, whatever, all of those things are typically in the mountains. Now, I should have had another preface when I say mountains. Not everywhere has mountains. Some places, this whole video could probably kind of carry over to just rural, like getting more rural. A lot of these points apply, but some of them are definitely specific to the mountains, and most of them are kind of general. Like it's not like everything I say is absolutely every mountain house will have it, and absolutely this is exactly how it will compare to an equivalent suburb, but in general, these points remain valid. So yeah, being closer to things that you actually like. We'll get into the cons because you're further from some stuff as well. And then there's more community. Like you know your neighbors a little better. Again, in generality, some people in neighborhoods just have great relationships with their neighbors. But in the mountains, you kind of know your neighbors. There's not as much population typically. So you go to the grocery store, you're kind of seeing the same people. You go out to the restaurants, you're kind of seeing the same people. If your town has those things, you go to the post office, it's the same person, they know you. So there's more sense of community, and a lot of times just your neighbors. You're up here and you have a tool that your neighbor needs to borrow, and your neighbor has a tool that you need to borrow, or maybe your buddy, one of your neighbors is going to plow your driveway, or they're going out of town and they're asking you to watch over their animals or whatever. I do feel like there's a stronger sense of community in the mountains. The flip side of that, there's usually no HOA. Now, HOAs suck. I have never been in a place that had a super strict HOA, but I have heard so many horror stories of HOAs. Now, there are some HOA mountain communities, don't get me wrong, there definitely are, but for the most part, you can do whatever you want to do. That's good or bad, depending on, who your neighbors are. If I wanted to, I could park 40 buses on my front lawn and nobody could do anything about it, and they could be there until they rust down to nothing and be an eyesore for everyone around. But back to the community aspect, a lot of the times mountain people really have respect for their neighbors, so they don't want to do that kind of stuff. Not everyone, but you have freedom to do whatever you want to do for the most part. I mean, there's government, blah, but no HOAs, so that's nice. There's typically less crime, less of all kinds of crime. There's certainly less violent crime, but just less crime in general. People, do they commit crimes in the mountains? They do. But for the most part, you take a smaller population, more rural environment, and the crime is just gonna go down, which is nice. Now, not directly related to crime, but politics are typically better in the mountains as well. This will vary depending on where you live, and I'm not gonna get into a political rant, but politics and the people up here are generally a little better. Now, you also get to buy some fun toys out of necessity. Like, I don't know a person in the mountains that doesn't have a chainsaw. I don't know a lot of people that don't have some type of quad or UTV or plow or something. Almost everyone has four-wheel drive. Like, all the people have trucks. You got everything in the mountains, and a lot of them are somewhat of a necessity. So, you live in the suburbs and you don't really have a reason to have a chainsaw, but you live in the mountains and all of a sudden you do. So I consider that a pro. And then on that kind of same note, I say it kind of hardens you a little bit. And this is, again, in general. You take the average mountain person and you can compare it to the average city or suburb person. The mountain guy is going to be able to handle things better. They're going to know how to handle an axe. They're going to know how to get you out of a ditch if you slide into it. They're almost all going to own guns. So it's just, again, that's kind of community. That's kind of the people that you surround yourself with. But I would say in a lot of senses, and not to say like they're a higher caliber of person in terms of like class and wealth and educate, like not necessarily those things, but just kind of more in the things that I care about. And with that, honestly, becomes self-reliance. There's a much bigger sense of self-reliance out there. And this is gonna differ a lot depending on where in the mountains you are, how far remote. Like, I am not that far removed. I can drive 30 minutes and be in Denver. So I'm not like way out there in the mountains. So again, a lot of this will change depending on how far you are out. I would say the further out you get, even the harder and the more resilient the people become. But even as close as I am, people are a lot more self-reliant. Now, I have not experienced a power outage actually since I've been in this house for a year. My previous house up at 9,000 feet did not experience that many power outages or anything either, but you do have an overall sense of self-reliance because if you're up in the mountains, typically weather's going to be more extreme and you're going to need to be able to survive if the power goes out, if it snows 5 feet and you're literally snowed in and nobody can get to you and you can't get anywhere and the power's out, you got to live. So most places have wood burning stoves, most places have generator, almost everyone up here has, enough food and materials to kind of live for a while. So there's just a more practical reason for self-reliance in the mountains, which obviously carries over hugely for things that I care about, preparedness. So you got more opportunities for homesteading, you got more reasons to be more self-reliant, and then you just kind of start getting down that rabbit hole and you're like, well, I should really get this, and I have some chickens, so maybe I should get an incubator in case I need to make some, I should really get a greenhouse. I just have the and it just kind of sends you on that path. And in the mountains, it's a con that I have for later, but while I'm talking about it now, your weather is more extreme, so it's not as easy to grow things. So in some senses, it's great way to be more self-reliant, but not in all senses. It's much easier to grow food at lower elevation. And then it's kind of the one that I touched on earlier, but just the feeling, the emotions you get of living in the mountains, just peace and tranquility, and just when it is freezing cold outside and your house is heated, especially with the wood burning stove, and it's just, you kick your feet up, you watch the snow fall. It's the good life. Okay, so again, I could go on all day about the pros, the good, but let's get into some of the bad. So there are negatives to living in the mountains. A lot of them are related to kind of modern niceties that we've kind of grown accustomed to in a civilized world. I would kind of view them as negatives, but they kind of could be twisted into positives as well. But I'll just present them as negatives, and then you can use your imagination on how they're actually pretty good for you. So one, you're probably not gonna be using DoorDash. Again, this is dependent on where you live, but even me, like relatively close to the city, like I'm a 10-minute drive from multiple grocery stores and restaurants and even some fast food and stuff like that, but I cannot get DoorDash. I can't get Uber Eats. I can't get pizza delivered to my house. So you can't do that kind of stuff. So either A, you need to cook food at home, or B, you need to drive and go get it yourself. But it is, kind of a bummer sometimes. With that, you're further from a lot of amenities. Again, I'm kind of fortunate. I'm a short drive to pretty much everything I need on the daily, including a Tractor Supply and Ace Hardware. Like there's really everything that I pretty much need outside of like a Costco. But you're further from stuff. If you love to go out to fancy restaurants, you're gonna be further from it. If you love to go to various professional sports games, you're further from it. Airport, probably further from it. IKEA, further. Costco, further. Probably a lot of your friends and relatives and family members maybe that don't live in the mountains, further. So in general, this is very obvious, but not something that people necessarily consider. You're further from everything, so it's gonna take more effort, it's gonna take more fuel, it's gonna take more time to get to those places. So then deliveries, you gotta be pretty far out there to not get deliveries. They may take an extra day or something. I've said this a million times, I'm not that far out into the mountains, so I can occasionally get Amazon same-day deliveries. Not often, not on most items, but every once in a while I'll come across an item that offers a same-day delivery. Now, it doesn't always come the same day, but in general, the further you are from civilization, the longer deliveries will be. But, I've been out there and seen UPS drivers, and the Postal Service delivers almost everywhere. So chances are you still can get a package. Just, some things maybe you can't get delivered. If you're too far from a Home Depot or something, they probably won't deliver, but deliveries, for the most part, you'll be all right, but sometimes you won't be. You might not be able to get the absolute fastest internet. Now, there's some things like Starlink and long distance Wi-Fi and all these, 5G internet, stuff like that available now, but almost always you're gonna be able to have faster internet near a major city. So I don't have the fastest internet right now, and I have friends down in town that have like gigabit, 2 gigabit internet, and some of them are cheaper than the internet that I pay and like 10 times as fast. So not horrible. My internet can do we can stream, multiple 4K devices at once. I can upload YouTube videos, but it just takes a lot longer, which is one question people ask why I don't shoot in 4K. Because unfortunately with my internet, it would take like 10 to 15 hours to upload a 4K video. And that's a long time. So that's one of the reasons I don't shoot in 4K. So slower internet, that's almost universal now. 2-3 years from now, maybe the Tesla Starlink will be more advanced and we'll have pretty comparable speeds. But for now, you're gonna deal with slower internet. And another probably obvious is the weather is oftentimes harsher. Now it's not harsher as in hotter, it's almost never hotter at higher altitude, but the sun is harsher. You'll get sunburn faster at higher altitude than you will lower altitude. There's less atmosphere, you're technically closer to the sun. So the sun is a little harsher in some regards, and the winters are obviously gonna be harsher. You're gonna get more snow probably, you're gonna get more cold, you're gonna get more frost. So that factors into a lot of things. The clothing that you wear, the preparedness that you keep in your car, the kind of tools that you have outside. You're gonna probably need a snowblower, you might need a plow. There's a lot of things that are different. For me, the main, I don't know, drawback of that is dealing with snow. If it's a big, heavy snow, especially if it's snowing for like a couple days, you're gonna throw some time at snow maintenance, snow mitigation. I designed this house with a covered deck specifically because I don't wanna have to shovel snow off of it every snowstorm. But a lot of times you'll have a longer driveway. A lot of times you'll have a bigger area. So, you know, in the city or in the suburbs, when you just have like a 30-foot driveway to shovel or snow blow, it is cake compared to kind of what myself and a lot of other mountain people are dealing with. But the other thing is it limits your growing season. Your winters start a little earlier and they stay a little longer. So I am really wanting to get more into all aspects of self-reliance, but one of those is growing more of my own food. I do a little bit of it now, but not much. But you're gonna be limited on the types of fruit trees you can plant. You're gonna be limited on just your growing season of all of your crops, your vegetables. You're gonna have to start a little later. You're gonna have to harvest a little sooner. You can mitigate it with various greenhouses and some other techniques like that. But in general, your growing season is just smaller and you can flat out just not grow some stuff. So that is probably for me, truly the biggest negative of living in the mountains, that one for me. Now, another one is depending on your hobbies or sports or interests, you may be further from them. I kind of talked about this earlier, but this hasn't affected me too much. Like, I don't care to go into the city. I'll get to that later. But now with kids, you're thinking about like, oh, what extracurricular activities there are. Like my brother specifically, who absolutely loves living in the mountains, has a 13-year-old daughter. I think she's 14 now. 13 or 14, I don't know, Kayla, I'm sorry. But they actually moved to the city because Kayla was getting to the age where they really wanted to do more stuff for her. She wanted to play volleyball. She wanted to like have friends in the neighborhood, stuff like that. So when you live in the mountains, granted, we have great school districts. A lot of times the mountains actually have really good school districts. So our school districts up here are some of the best in the state, but and yeah, on that point, they also have a lot of sports and stuff, but not a lot of other extracurricular activities are around. And Isabella, my 13-year-old, can't like ride her bike to a friend's house. Now, again, depending on where you live, maybe you have a couple neighbors that are the same age. Where we live right now, we don't really. So anytime she wants to hang out with a friend, it's a drive for now. So that's another thing where depending on whether you have kids or not. Now, there are a ton of I didn't talk about it in the pros, but I think there are some healthy advantages to raising a kid in the mountains as well. But there are certainly some negatives to it also. And then another obvious one is it limits the job accessibility depending on what you need. Do you need to go into an office? Well, you better be in commuting distance to that office. A lot of jobs are remote now, so that's nice, and there's a lot of ways to make money, and it's the easiest time in the world probably to make a career change. But there are some professions that require you to go to a place. If you're a nurse or a doctor, you're going to have to go to a hospital. For the most part, there are outpatient centers, there are urgent care centers and stuff. Like, depending on what you want to do, you might be able to get away with a job that isn't in a big hospital or something like that. But there are certainly jobs that require you to live in a certain area. So employment opportunities are certainly limited in mountain communities. So that's just another thing. It's kind of one of those no-does. You're probably not going to move to the mountains and not think about your job, but it is one thing that you got to consider. Now, building is also a little more complicated. This kind of goes back to the self-sufficiency, self-reliance part of it. I didn't speak to it, but a lot of mountain houses, most of them I would say, are on a well and septic. Now, there are certain areas and certain communities that kind of band together and make like a little septic system and a little water system, and you can pay a tap fee kind of like you do down in town. But everywhere that I've lived and my friends and people that I know, they're all on their own well and their own septic system. Now that sounds kind of gross. The septic system, oh, septic? Like, I remember hearing about septics when I was like a little kid, and I always thought it was just like sounded gross. But I mean, it's not really. Modern septics, you pretty much live like normal. Now, you're not going to want to flush as much stuff down your drains. You're not going to want to pour bleach down your drain all the time, but you essentially have your own sewage waste plant on site. You don't have to think about it. You don't do anything. It all just happens by itself. So basically it goes into a tank. There's a bunch of like microorganisms and stuff in there that kind of chows on it all. And then it kind of goes through a filtering system and then gets released back into the ground, which, you know, at that point it's theoretically supposed to be, you know, kind of drinkable. So you don't smell it for the most part. If your septic is operating as it should, you don't think about it. There's nothing like that. And then you have a well, so you are your own water source as well, which is awesome for self-reliance, but it does make the cost of building a little more expensive. That's an extra, you know, for the well and the septic system, $50,000 or more, to kind of get that infrastructure in place. But once it's in place, you're paying for the electricity to pump the water out of your well. Some places have rain catchment systems. They're not as common in mountain areas due to freezing climates, but you don't ever have to pay for water again, which is nice. And you also have control over your water. You could do this in your own house in the city, but most people with a well also have a relatively advanced water filtering mechanism, and you're just kind of more in tune with your water supply, and you've probably done more water testing and everything, versus a person in the city, again, generally is just drinking whatever. So my water is great once you kind of get all the filters and do all the stuff that you need to do with it, but makes building more expensive. And then getting together with your friends, I mentioned this earlier, may be a little harder because they're a little further away. That may be a good thing or it may be a bad thing, but just a thing to note. All right, so the final category are just general things to factor in that aren't necessarily pros, or they didn't like clearly fit into the good or the bad. So they're just kind of things to consider. Now this one cannot be overstated. It was actually the realtor I was using when I bought my first house in the mountains. When I moved to the mountains, she lived in the mountains. She was a mountain specific realtor. She told me, Mike, just so you know, like you seem like a pretty active guy. You seem like a hip dude. No, she didn't say any of that stuff. She said, well, you're gonna move to the mountains. Just know that you will never want to go down the hill into the city. And I thought, oh, that's fine, whatever. And I'm sure it won't affect me. I'll just go when I need to go. But it is very true. I never want to leave for anything. And it's almost to the point now, and I don't know that this is necessarily living in the mountains or just other factors at play, but the thought of going down into the city now actually kind of disgusts me, dealing with traffic and lines and waiting to be seated at restaurants or trying to find parking. It sounds horrible. It takes a lot to get me to go do that stuff. Now, granted, when I lived in the suburbs, I hated it as well. So that's maybe somewhat your personality type, but it's like an event anytime you got to go to the city. It sounds silly because it's only, like for me, it's only an extra, handful of minutes drive compared to some people, but it really is like you're leaving vacation to go back to the suck. So not a whole lot of my friends watch my videos, but when I have to go to one of my friends' houses in the suburbs, or when somebody invites me out to dinner at some restaurant in town, don't get me wrong, if you were watching this, my friends, just continue to invite me because I enjoy your time. But I hate the act of doing it. If somebody invites me to a restaurant, somebody's birthday, one of my friends, I gotta really like that person to go and do it. Now, fortunately for me, Ashley feels the exact same way, maybe even stronger. Her hatred of the city maybe surpasses my own, but it's just one thing that you should definitely consider. And just to put things into perspective, the town I live in doesn't really even have a traffic light. Like, we have some stop signs, and technically there are a couple of traffic lights, but they're just at the high school to help handle that high school traffic. But I am never in traffic. I am never in a line. I am never inconvenienced by waiting for other people. Like sometimes if a restaurant up here is hopping, maybe I'll wait for a couple of minutes, but that even rarely happens. So I love that. Now, another thing to consider, now this is more of a consideration if you're shopping for a house or you're shopping for land or whatever, is do not negate the importance of the sun. The sun is so important. The sun is life, and the sun is heat, and the sun is vitality. It's kind of funny now, as I get more into the health journey, there's more people talking about all the benefits of the sun. Now, it's not like a new thing. Everyone's known the sun provides vitamin D, but if you listen to guys like Huberman and stuff, that early morning sunlight in your eyes and all, like, the sun is just hugely beneficial for your health, but for your physical health, but also for your mental and your emotional health. There's a disorder. Is it called a disorder? It's called SAD, seasonal affective disorder, something like that. But basically, when the days get shorter and there's more cloud and there's just not as much sun, you literally get depressed. Some people get very depressed in climates like that. The suicide rates are often higher as a proportion to the amount of sun that a location gets. So, all that to say, sun is amazing. I talk about it on the channel. I kind of have a whole series about the design and the build of my house. I shot for land a lot. I chose this location based specifically on the sunlight, the layout, how much sun I would get in a day, where it would hit, how I would orient the house, how I would design the house, how I would place the windows, where I would put the rooms. I designed basically every aspect of my house around the sun. Now, in the mountains, you want the sun just because it makes your living experience so much better, and it makes you happier. Literally, it makes you healthier. But sun also melts snow. So if you have a driveway, even if you live in the city, if you live in the suburbs, if you're moving to a snowy climate, try your best to get a southern-facing driveway and some windows that face south. They'll both help to heat your home, but just make your life better. So sun is hugely important. There's a bunch of apps out there you can kind of track the sun. The sun gets low, for those that don't know, the sun gets lower in the winter. So where you are, where the trees are, like my previous houses, they had pretty good sun exposure, but when the sun got low, I had so many trees around that I was still kind of living in the shade. Now, if you're living on where there's a real hill or a real mountain, and that is south of you, you may literally be in the shade the entire year. I drive by houses every single day of my life where they just have so much more snow in their yard, in their driveway. They're just, the sun does not touch them for months at a time, and that is not something that you want. Now, another point is try to live somewhere, if you can, that's off of a county maintained road. They will repair that road. Some places better than others, like, depending on how far out you are, the road may be rough, but it will technically be maintained and it will be plowed. Even better if you live on a bus route for a school. They give priority plowing. I don't know really I don't know the ins and outs of it, but they will make the best effort to plow for the buses. The county is paying for the plows. The county is paying for the buses. They want to make sure all of those things work together. So if you're on a county maintained road, chances are you're going to get plowed. If you're on a bus route, you'll probably get plowed even better. So just, if you can plan around that, ask your realtor, you'll be able to find her. Ask some neighbors maybe before you buy a house or buy some land. That is the ideal. It's not a deal breaker if you don't. I know some people that live on roads that aren't maintained, and usually there's a guy or a couple guys in the neighborhood, or they kind of band together and all plow on Tuesday and Thursday and you'll plow. But where I live especially, at most it's snowing like once a week, like kind of in the peak. So plowing is not like a daily event by any means. Not for everywhere, but for most places, you're not plowing every single day. And the county's not plowing every single day either. But if you don't live off of a county road, just know that's one extra element that you'll need to factor in. Are you going to have to maintain that road yourself? Do you have neighbors? Are the neighbors going to move? However it's going to work, it's always a little bit different if you're not living on a county maintained road. I talked about it earlier a little bit. There may be health implications for some people living at altitude. What kind of diseases or whatever, I'm not a health expert, but certain conditions are not good at elevation. The oxygen's a little thinner. Other factors are involved. When we had Cooper, my 1-year-old, he does have a small heart defect, which we found out recently. He'll probably need to actually get open heart surgery eventually, which is a bummer, but kind of related to that, but it's kind of common for a lot of babies if you're living at high altitude, but you deliver down at a hospital that's lower altitude, they're gonna put you on oxygen oftentimes. So Cooper was on oxygen for a month after his birth because the air is thinner at altitude. Now there are other studies out there of like the longest life people are like these monks that live at 12,000 feet or something. That isn't totally accurate, but there are some studies around like villages and stuff that live at high altitude, and they also have exceptionally high age of death. what's the term? And it's kind of, I think the studies were more correlation other than causation. They had different factors, you know, different eating habits, different lifestyles and whatnot. But living at high altitude does not mean like you'll die faster or you'll be more unhealthy or something, but for certain conditions, it may be a factor. And then probably the last thing to consider is most of your friends will probably want to come to your house in the apocalypse. So, you know, just make sure you either are ready to shut them out or you have made provisions to house a bunch of people. Now, I always say, you know, if that time came, I wouldn't mind a few extra eyes, a few extra arms to put some guns in, but it does throw some things off as well. That one, you know, hopefully never happens, but it is something to consider. So I think that's gonna wrap it up on this random talking, rambling video of moving to the mountains. But all that to say, I would not change it for the world. Sometimes I think about, and Ashley thinks about it too, we'll go down and visit a friend in the suburbs. And again, this sounds like it's trash talking, and I do not mean it like that at all. But we go down into the suburbs, even nice neighborhoods in the suburbs, and we're just like, we do not ever want to have to go back. We will do everything we can to stay in the mountains as long as we can. So I encourage everyone to do it. Cities suck. Cities are horrible. Suburbs, maybe a little less so, but yeah, I absolutely love it. And I don't know, hope this video was helpful or at least gave you something to think about. And I will probably direct mountain living inquiries back to this video, so it helps me. All right, guys. Well, leave some comments down below if there's things I missed or things to consider. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them as best I can. Typically, if you have questions, leave a comment on a video. I try to answer answerable questions in videos. My YouTube channel is not big enough and I'm not famous enough or too important enough to read those comments. So I read them. I don't answer all of them because some of them are just kind of weird and I don't really have a good answer for. But if the question is, if I feel like I can answer it and I think it would help you and other people, I'll try and answer it. So leave questions down below. I always like to hear from you in the comments anyway. YouTube algorithm likes it. So, you know, stop by, say hi, hit that thumbs up button, send this video to a friend. It all helps. I appreciate you watching. I couldn't do it without your support. I'm hugely grateful for every single view that any of my videos get. So I appreciate you. All right, guys. Well, until next time, take care.